Hi, I'm Scott from the Rio Grande Tech Team, and today I'm going to be talking about Boolean operations within ZBrush. So let's get started. Okay, so I've got ZBrush booted up, and the first thing we need to do is we need to bring in a couple of subtools. So I'm going to navigate to my tool palette here, and I'm going to bring in a Cube 3D. So I'm going to click and drag to bring this out into my scene, immediately hit the T key to go into edit mode. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a Polymesh 3D by clicking up here in the tool palette. So we need to add one more subtool to our scene here. And I'm going to navigate to the subtool palette, expand that, and I'm going to go down to Append, and I'm going to bring in a Sphere 3D. And now it's inside of our cube, so I'm going to want to select it, and I'm going to use the gizmo to kind of move it out of the way. So go up here and click on Move, bring up the gizmo, and then we're just going to bring this out somewhere where we can see it, but we want to keep these overlapping. So what Booleans are is a way to either add subtools together, subtract them from one another, or create new pieces from where they intersect. So this will become pretty apparent once we start getting into it. But in order to start doing our Booleans, the first thing we need to do is we need to go up here next to the light box and turn on our live Boolean system. So just click on that and make sure that it's highlighted. So I'm going to go back to the first object in our scene, which is our cube. And all of the Boolean operations are going to take place within this subtool palette here. So the first thing I need to do is select where the Boolean is going to start. And if you have a lot of subtools here, you can actually control what objects are involved in that Boolean and leave out others. So the way you do that is the first object, you would click here on this first box. It's got a little arrow here, and these three options here are our three Boolean functions. We have Boolean addition or Boolean add, subtract is the second one, and intersection is the third one. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this arrow, and it's going to tell ZBrush that this is where we want the Boolean to start. And then we need to select how we want this sphere to interact with this cube. So right now it is on Boolean add. So if we were to go ahead and run this Boolean, it would add these two objects together as one single mesh. Because the thing we're trying to eliminate, and I'll show you, I'll turn on transparent mode so you can see what I'm talking about. So right now, because we have these two intersecting primitives, we have some geometry on the inside that's overlapping. So we have this kind of portion right in here where these two are overlapping. Now this becomes important when we want to go to 3D print. If you have this kind of overlapping geometry, your 3D printing software will see this cube and this sphere as solid objects, but then you have this overlapping geometry, so it can become confused. It can, most of the time it results in print errors because it doesn't know whether this is a solid piece or because it has geometry on the inside. If you're going to be taking this out for 3D printing, it's best to eliminate this internal geometry, and that's what Booleans are going to do for us. So I'm going to turn off transparent mode again. The nice part about ZBrush is we can use this live Boolean system to see what it's going to look like in real time. So right now I have it on Boolean add. So if we were to run our Boolean, this is exactly what the piece is going to look like, minus that internal geometry that we looked at just a second ago. Now, if I go over to Boolean Subtract, which is the second option here, you can see it's actually cutting away from that cube. We're actually using that second subtool as a cutter when we Boolean subtract. And you can see I've got some faceting on the inside, and that's because we didn't add any subdivisions to our sphere. So if I were to go back to, we'll go back to add, just so we can see the sphere. And I'm going to open up the geometry palette, and I'm just going to give the sphere some, got to select the sphere first, there we go, and I'm going to give that some subdivisions. So I'm going to click that a couple times, just get it a bit smoother than what it was before. Now go back to my subtool palette and now do the Boolean subtraction, and you can see that cutaway is much smoother now that we have some subdivisions there. So the last one is our intersection. So when I click on intersection, it's going to take that overlapping geometry and it's going to make a new subtool just from that area. So this affords some really interesting design capabilities when you start overlapping shapes, and there's some great tutorials in the Z Classroom that demonstrate this, but this allows you to create new subtools from that overlapping geometry. And the nice part about this live Boolean system, I'm going to go back to subtract real quick, is that I can move it in real time. So my sphere is here. It's actually cutting away from the cube, but it's actually still there. This is just, the live Boolean system is showing us a preview of what this is going to look like. So I can actually go up to move, move scale or rotate, and get my gizmo here, and I can actually move it in real time to make sure that I've dialed it in and got it just where I want it. Now this is different from a lot of other systems, like different CAD programs, where you set up the Boolean, you run it, see what it looks like. If it's not quite right, you have to undo the Boolean, readjust, rerun it. This allows us to actually see what it's going to look like in real time before we make that commitment of doing the Boolean. Boolean operations, they can have a lot of calculations associated with them, so they can be they can take a little while to run, but this is a very simple Boolean, so it won't take any time at all. So once you have everything where you want it, in order to execute this Boolean, on our subtool palette, you would go down to the Boolean submenu down here. So go ahead and click on that, and then click Make Boolean Mesh. So when we click that, you'll notice it doesn't actually come into our scene here. It actually comes in as a new tool in the tool menu. So I can either append this back in if I want, or I can just click up here, and now I have my Boolean piece. And now I can do whatever I want to it. I can do more Booleans. I can do start sculpting on this, add it in as some kind of design element, or what have you. Okay, so now let's do one more demonstration. Let's show a bit more about the intersection, because there are a lot of interesting possibilities with that. So I'm going to go back into my tool menu, and I'm going to bring a sphere back out, or a cube back out. I'm going to make that a polymesh 3D, and I'm going to append in my sphere one more time. So sphere's on the inside. I'm going to go ahead and select it, and then I'm going to go to my gizmo by clicking the move button, and I'm going to use this yellow circle on the inside to scale the whole thing up so it's larger than the cube. I'm going to go ahead and set up the Boolean again. So I have live Boolean checked. That is highlighted. So I'm going to start it at the cube, because that's my first subtool, and I'm going to click Boolean intersection. Now you'll notice the sphere just kind of disappeared. And that's because we have this set to Boolean intersection, but there's no intersecting points right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to shrink down the sphere until it starts making contact with this cube. And I'm going to bring my gizmo back up by clicking the move tool and take this yellow box, and I'm just going to click and drag and start bringing this down. Now again, I don't have any subdivisions on my sphere, but I can, if you ever need to, you can always just turn off live Boolean for a second if you need to see both of them. And I'm going to go back into the geometry palette, and I'm going to add some subdivisions just to smooth everything out. It makes for a much cleaner Boolean. And then I can turn live Boolean back on. See, that's much better. And you can see just by bringing down a sphere over a cube, we're already getting some kind of interesting design elements there. And then I can incorporate more subtools later to really make this unique. But yeah, there's a lot of possibilities just within this Boolean intersection for creating some really interesting stuff. So right now I'm going to go ahead and run that. I think that looks pretty good. I can actually turn off my gizmo if I want. So yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and to execute this Boolean, back in the Subtool menu here, under the Boolean submenu, I'm going to click Make Boolean Mesh. And you can see a little progress bar at the top. If you have a Boolean that's really complicated, you'll see that status bar at the top letting you know how close it is to being done. And then I can go ahead and bring in my new subtool. So one of the nice parts about using this Boolean system is that you saw that I was actually adding subdivisions to my sphere to make for a cleaner surface. So I'm getting a much cleaner surface here. There is another way of doing that that's not going to mess with your active points or your total point system, and that's by using dynamic subdivisions. So I'll show you what I mean by that. We're just going to keep working with this piece. So I'm going to append in a cylinder, and I'm going to select the cylinder, and I'm going to use my gizmo to kind of stretch it out just a little bit, and then go into the top view and kind of bring this down. I'm going to leave just a little bit of a flat spot right there. So right now I don't have any subdivisions that I've added to this cylinder, so you're getting this kind of faceting effect. But I've got my cylinder selected, so I'm going to go into the geometry palette, and I'm going to find dynamic subdivisions, and I'm just going to turn it on. I'm not going to click apply, because that will then add these subdivisions to this cylinder and increase my active point count. Right now, this is just a kind of a mock-up of what this cylinder will look like after I've applied these subdivisions. But I can actually do Booleans with these using the system. So that way I don't have to add all those subdivisions and make the Boolean that much more complicated and take that much longer. So I'm going to go ahead and add the same thing to here and over here. So I'm going to navigate back to the Subtool palette here, and I've got my cylinder selected. I'm just going to click Duplicate to add another one in there. And then I'm going to use the gizmo by clicking on the Move button, and I'm going to grab this rotate line here, and I'm going to hold Shift while I bring it down 90 degrees. Okay, so we need to do one more. So I've still got this one highlighted. So I'm going to go ahead and click Duplicate on that. And now I'm going to do the same thing I did before, holding Shift until it locks into place. So now I've got this going on. So now we need to go ahead and Boolean these out. So I'm going to do the exact same process as before. I've got Live Boolean turned on. My mesh that I'm working with, I'm going to hit the Start button, and then I'm going to turn all of these to Boolean Subtraction. So now we're getting something like this. So this could be something like a bead or some other kind of design element, or whatever you happen to be making. You can use this in your jewelry. I've got everything set up. Got the Start button, got it all set to Boolean Subtract, and now there is one more thing that I have to do before I execute this. So because I'm using dynamic subdivisions on these three cylinders here, under the Boolean submenu, there's a button right next to the button we've been clicking called Allow Dynamic Subdiv, or DSDiv. I just need to click that and make sure that that's highlighted, and that's telling ZBrush that we will be Booleaning with models that have dynamic subdivisions applied. And when I click Make Boolean Mesh, it will populate in my tool palette up here, and now I've got this design element that I can use. One thing to be aware of when you're doing Booleans, let's say I'm using this technique to get a basic shape going, and then I'm going to start sculpting on it. So one thing that you'll want to look out for is I'm going to turn on polyframes. We're going to take a look at the geometry of this. So I'm going to zoom in here. So you can see on the outside here, I've got some nice even geometry. This is great for getting started sculpting. But I've got a lot of variation in here. I've got some weird triangles going on around these edges. I've got more kind of strange triangles around these corners. If you're not going to be doing any sculpting on this, then this is not a bad thing. You can add this in as a design element, but if you're going to be doing any kind of sculpting around it, like say, let me turn off the polyframes real quick. If I want to smooth out these corners a bit, you can see if I hold Shift to bring up my smooth brush, you can see how it's not exactly smooth. It gets a bit jagged in areas. Even right around here, you get some strange geometry. So we would need to do one thing first. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that. And again, if this is just something that you're bringing into your scene and there won't be any sculpting on it, this is fine. You can keep going. But if you are going to do any sculpting, then this next step would be beneficial. So we need to change the geometry of this. And the first thing we're going to try and just take a look and see how it works is we're going to try to Z-remesh. So we're going to navigate to our geometry palette here, and there is an option for Z-remesher. And I'm going to go ahead and click the button to start that. And we'll see how this comes out. So it came out a bit rough. I'm not really happy with that. You can see how we've got some little jagged bits here. Yeah, I got some broken geometry here. It's not really, that doesn't really look good. I'm not really happy with that. So let's go ahead and Control Z and undo that. And we'll try one more method. Let's try a Dynamesh. So still in the geometry palette, I'm going to click on Dynamesh, and I'm going to turn the resolution up just a little bit to about 304, and now I'm going to hit Dynamesh. Now that looks much better. So if I turn on my polyframes again, you can see I've got much better geometry in all of these different areas. We've eliminated a lot of those triangles, and we have just a lot more to work with. And we've also got some different polygroups that we can use to our advantage later. So I'm going to turn off polyframes, and now when I go in to smooth out these corners, should be a little cleaner. Yeah, that's much better. So I can go in, kind of clean these up a little bit if I need to, and go on from there. So those are just a few quick ways to kind of clean these edges up. You can see I got a bit of faceting from the dynamic subdivisions. Again, I can go in with a smooth brush, and I'm just holding Shift. Normally I would have symmetry on, but yeah, you can kind of clean these up if you want, or you can just forego the dynamic subdivision Booleans and just add some subdivisions to it later, or before you actually do the Boolean. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is there's a way to do some simple Booleans actually using Dynamesh. So I'm going to bring my cube back out. I'm just clicking, the cube is already in here, so I'm going to go ahead and just click that, bring that back into our scene. I'm going to make it a Polymesh 3D. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on Dynamesh. So now we've made our cube a Dynamesh object. And we need to bring our sphere back in. So I'm going to click on our Subtool palette and click Append and select the sphere. and then I'm going to select it in the Subtool menu, click on Move to bring out our gizmo, and now I'm going to just kind of bring it out here just so we can see it. It's not really a Boolean, it's still Dynamesh, but it is very similar. For this operation, we can actually turn off live Boolean, because for this we're not going to need it. And I'm going to get my gizmo out of the way as well. I'm going to select my cube here. When you're using Dynamesh to do you can use Dynamesh to do either a Boolean addition or subtraction. You can't use intersection in this instance. But we just need to make sure that the first object that we're going to be doing this with is a Dynamesh object. The sphere, it doesn't matter if that's Dynamesh or not. This will work the same way. So we've got this as a Dynamesh object. We got our sphere in here. First thing we need to do is we need to select what effect we want this sphere to have on our cube. And I'm going to leave it as the Boolean add or Boolean addition. We're going to add these two together and get rid of that internal geometry that we saw at the very beginning. So the first thing I have to do when I'm doing these kinds of commands with Dynamesh is I need to merge them together. Right now they're two separate subtools. I need them to be one subtool. So the way I do that is I've got the top one selected, and in my subtool palette I'm going to go down to merge, and we've got a few options in here. The one we're interested in is merge down. So that's actually going to look at the subtool that's just below the one we have highlighted, and it will merge that together. You also have ones like merge visible, which will merge all of the subtools that are visible, and merge similar, which will actually look at similar subtools in your list and merge those together. But for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and click merge down, and it's always going to give you this little window at the beginning. So you can either click OK or click always OK. Either way, always OK will make sure that box doesn't come up again. So I'm going to click that. And now we've merged these two together, and now I'm just going to re-Dynamesh. I'm off of my model here. I'm going to hold Control, drag, and there we go. Now we've Dynameshed these two together, and you can see I've got a bit of a little fillet here. I have the resolution on my Dynamesh pretty low, so it looks a bit jagged. But that's one way you can merge two items together, and I'm not creating a separate subtool that I have to keep bringing back in or changing to. I can just do this right in the scene that I'm in. And if you want to give your CAD design a bit more of a handcrafted look, it does look very similar to a solder seam at low resolutions, and I can always go in and kind of clean this up a bit with my smooth brush. So you can create some interesting effects there. I'm going to go ahead and undo my smooth. If we want to do Boolean subtraction with this, I'm not going to bring in a new cube or sphere. I'm just going to go back. Now if I hit Control Z, it just gets rid of my sphere, because when you try to after you've merged something together and try to undo it, it will typically just get rid of that other subtool. But we can still split these apart. So in your subtool menu here, you have a split area, and I'm going to select split to parts. And again, it'll pop up with that same window as before. I'm just clicking always OK. And now it's split our two subtools back up so we can work them independently if we need to. So for this, I'm going to click on the subtraction option. And because this isn't a live Boolean operation, we're not going to get a preview in this instance. So you just want to be, you can check it in by using the live Boolean system before you go through with the Dynamesh. That is an option. But just doing it this way, you don't actually have a view of what it's going to look like after it's done. So same process as before. We've got subtract selected, we need to merge these together. So I'm going to go down to merge, and I've got my cube selected, so I'm going to merge down. And now that those are merged, I can re-Dynamesh. So hold Control, click and drag and release. And now we have same kind of operation. Again, my Dynamesh is pretty low resolution, so that's why we're getting a bit of a jagged edge here. But you can increase the resolution on your Dynamesh when you put this cube together to make sure that's going to be a little cleaner. Now, just as a reminder, this will only work on addition or subtraction. You won't be able to do this with intersection. You would have to use the live Boolean system for that. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is just a few troubleshooting tips. So now that we've gone through how to use Dynamesh, I'm going to actually go back to my Cube 3D just by clicking on the cube here in my subtool, or in my tool palette, or you can click on this little box up here to actually bring in a separate one. And now I'm going to go and append in my sphere. So I'm going to select the sphere, same as before. I'm just kind of bringing it into our scene and moving it kind of out to the side just so we can see it. So let's get the gizmo out of the way, and while I'm up here, I'm going to turn on the live Boolean system. So we're going to do same as before. On our first subtool, we're going to click the little arrow there because that's where we want to start the Boolean. And for our sphere, we want to do a Boolean difference. So I click the subtract, and everything disappears. Same with intersection. If I try to do a Boolean intersection, my sphere and my cube have disappeared. And if I go back to addition, they're still there. So what's happening here? Well, we missed a very important step when we brought in our cube. We forgot to make this a polymesh 3D. So if you find yourself, when you bring in a primitive from your tool palette and you're trying to do Booleans on it and everything is just kind of disappearing when you try to do a subtraction or an intersection, make sure that you have clicked this box. So on my cube, if I click Make Polymesh 3D, we will append our sphere back in, select it, back to our Move tool, bring this out so I can see it, and then start the Boolean here with my cube, and then do Boolean subtraction or subtract. Now everything is working the way it's supposed to. So just make sure that if you're bringing in a primitive, make sure to click that Polymesh 3D. That will make sure that there's no weirdness with your Booleans. If you're going through it in a bit of a rush, and you can usually tell if you have clicked the Make Polymesh 3D because on your subtool here you have a PM. So that'll kind of let you know that you've selected it, because the cube that we selected was this one right here, and it doesn't have the PM in front of it for polymesh. The other thing to make sure is that on your subtool menu here, where you have all your subtools, the objects that you're going to be working with in your Boolean, the one you start with, along with everything else, make sure that this little eye icon is highlighted, because this can cause problems when you're doing your Booleans. You can see as I turn this off and on, if you try to do a Boolean with a sphere and this little eye icon is not highlighted, you won't actually see anything happening. So the sphere is still there, but it's not actually affecting my cube in any way because I have it hidden. So just make sure that when you're doing these Booleans, make sure these little eye icons are highlighted, and that way you're not going to have any unforeseen issues with your Booleans. So that's pretty much it for Booleans. Feel free to play with these. There's a lot of design capabilities. And it's a very effective way of doing hard edge modeling within ZBrush. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact us, and have a nice day.